Hey guys, welcome to Scripted Fear. This is the place where real stories come alive, true experiences told by real people, shared with me, and now shared with you. Some will give you chills, some will keep you up at night, and some will make you rethink everything. So if you love stories that feel too real to ignore, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe, turn on that post notification bell, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. Now, let's get into today's story. My name's Daniel, and this happened in 2015, when I was 27. At the time, I was living in Eastern Oregon and working long, stressful weeks. On my days off, I craved solitude, the kind of silence you can only find deep in the woods. That spring, I came across a few old blog posts about a fire. Lookout tower tucked away in the Umatilla National Forest. It hadn't been maintained for years and was technically closed to the public, but hikers who made it there described it as intact, with incredible views of the wilderness. The last post I could find was from 3 years earlier, which left me uncertain. Was it still standing? Was it even safe? The risk made it more tempting. I packed my car with gear for a 2-day trip: backpack, camping stove, water filter, flashlight, GPS unit, and enough food to last. I left early in the morning, the highway quiet as I drove through rolling hills and pines. By mid-morning, I turned off onto a narrow dirt road that wound deeper into the forest. The further I drove, the rougher it got: potholes, mud patches, branches scraping the sides of my car. It felt like the kind of road where people either had a destination or no business being there at all. After a long stretch, I found a shallow ditch off the side of the road, just big enough to pull over. This would be my starting point. I strapped on my pack, adjusted the GPS, and took my first steps into the woods. There wasn't a trail, no signposts, no markers, just forest. Every few minutes I checked the GPS to keep on course, but otherwise, it was just me pushing through brush, stepping over logs, and climbing ridges. The hike was supposed to take around 4 to 5 hours, but it felt longer as the hours passed. The forest grew thicker, the air damper. I remember how the silence started to press in. No birdsong, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and the weight of being alone. Around hour 3, I almost convinced myself to turn back. My shoulders ached from the pack, and sweat soaked through my shirt. But then I spotted a faint line through the trees, an outline high above the canopy. The tower. My pace quickened. As I got closer, the lookout slowly revealed itself. 4 tall stilts driven into the earth, supporting a square cabin above the tree-line. Weather-beaten and stripped of paint, but still standing proud. I dropped my pack at the base and walked around it. The wood was gray and splintered, but the beams looked solid. I pressed against them, half expecting rot, but they didn't budge. The ladder was metal, rust creeping along its rungs. I tested it with my weight. It groaned and shifted, but held. With both hands gripping tight, I climbed. Each step creaked under me, echoing in the still air. When I reached the top, I stepped onto the narrow wooden walkway and finally looked out. The view knocked the breath out of me. From up there, I could see for miles rolling hills of pine, and firs stretching in every direction. No rooftops, no roads, no signs of people, just the endless green ocean of the forest. Inside, the lookout was one small room, maybe 150 square feet, bare except for a decaying bed frame in one corner and a wooden desk in another. Windows spanned the walls, most of them cracked or fogged with age. The air inside smelled faintly of mildew and old wood. I set my pack down and unpacked my gear, rolled out my mattress and sleeping bag, set my stove on the desk, and boiled water for a simple meal. It wasn't much, but with the forest stretching out below me, it felt like luxury. By sunset, I was back out on the walkway, legs dangling over the edge. The sky lit up in layers of orange and pink, fading into deep blue. It was one of the most peaceful things I'd ever seen. When the sun finally disappeared, The forest was swallowed by darkness. The clouds covered the stars. So the night was absolute, like someone had thrown a black sheet over the world. I sat there for a while, letting the quiet sink in, not knowing that this would be the last calm moment of the trip. I don't know how long I sat out there in the dark before I noticed it. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, some flicker of reflection between the trees. But then it moved, slowly, steadily, weaving its way through the forest. A light, but not like a flashlight. A flashlight beam is sharp, clean, white. This was different. It glowed a deep orange red and flickered like fire. The closest thing I could compare it to was a torch. I leaned over the railing, squinting through the dark. The light bobbed and swayed as whoever carried it stepped between the trees. I can't overstate how strange this was. I was in the middle of nowhere, no trailheads, no campsites, nothing within miles. The hike to get here wasn't just long. It was punishing. And yet, here was someone out there, wandering the forest at night, holding fire like something out of another century. I watched it for minutes, long enough to feel my heartbeat shift from curiosity to unease. The light drifted in and out of sight, slipping behind trees, reappearing again, closer one moment, farther the next. Then, without warning, it disappeared completely. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. The forest went still again, the kind of stillness that presses against your ears. Finally, I stood up, deciding I should head inside and get some rest. But as I turned toward the door, something caught my eye. At the bottom of the tower, a man. He stood in the open clearing, directly beneath the lookout, his face tilted upward, staring straight at me. For a second, my brain struggled to catch up. I hadn't heard him approach. There was no flashlight beam, no rustle of movement, just silence. And then suddenly, he was there. I swallowed and called down, my voice cracking a little. "Hello? You okay down there?" He didn't answer, didn't move, just stared. The silence stretched thin, the way a rope tightens before it snaps. 10 seconds. 15. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, without a word, he raised his hand. Not waving, not signaling, just lifting his arm, palm half open, like an awkward greeting or some strange acknowledgement. And then, just as slowly, he lowered his hand, turned, and walked back into the trees. No light, no sound of footsteps. He vanished into the darkness like he was swallowed by it. I stood frozen, gripping the railing until my knuckles ached. Everything in me screamed that something was wrong. But another part of me, the part desperate not to panic, rationalized it. Maybe he was another hiker. Maybe he'd used this lookout before and just wanted to see if someone else was inside. The fact that he didn't speak, that he walked off without a flashlight, that he was carrying a torch earlier. I try not to think about that. Inside, I sat up in my sleeping bag, though I barely felt tired anymore. The wind picked up, rattling the old window frames. The wooden stilts groaned under shifting pressure. Every sound made me flinch. I told myself I'd be fine. I locked my focus on the fact that I had my pack, my GPS, and a way out if I needed it. But deep down, I already knew. The night wasn't going to stay quiet. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when a sound dragged me out of it. At first it was faint, a groan, a metallic shift that I mistook for the tower swaying in the wind. But then it came again, sharper, more deliberate, slow, heavy, uneven, and I realized it wasn't the tower, it was the ladder. Someone was on the ladder. Someone was climbing up toward me. Every muscle in my body locked tight. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just lay there in my bag with my ears straining until I thought they would burst. The creaks came one after another, steady, measured, and there was no mistaking them now. The weight of a person pulling on each rung, dragging themselves closer with patience that felt unnatural. I slid a hand out, found the straps of my backpack, and eased it over my shoulders. Every inch of movement seemed deafening. I unzipped the bag of my sleeping pad, the teeth rasping like a scream in the silence. I stood up, boots pressing into the warped boards, and tiptoed toward the doorway. The ladder kept groaning beneath invisible weight. Closer, closer, until it stopped. The sudden quiet was worse than the sound. My stomach knotted, and I pressed myself against the wall on the walkway, staring at the black tree-line. The sky, anything but the edge. I forced myself to lean over the railing. My flashlight shook in my hand, but I didn't turn it on. I peered down into the clearing, holding my breath until my chest burned. The ladder was empty. No one there. Not a shape, not a shadow. Nothing but the skeletal frame of the tower against the trees. I pulled back, confusion and terror tangling in my head. I had heard it, every single step, climbing rung by rung until it was almost at the top. And then silence. They hadn't climbed back down. They hadn't dropped away. They had simply vanished. That was when the footsteps came. Behind me. Fast. Heavy. Slamming against the walkway boards on the other side of the cabin. The sound rushed around the corner, and in a blur I caught movement through the window. A dark figure sliding past the glass. There and gone before I could register what I'd seen. My body moved on instinct. I bolted for the ladder. The first rung rattled as I grabbed hold and flung myself downward, hands slipping against the metal as sweat stung my palms. The entire tower shuddered under my panic. My boots clanged and slipped against the rungs, every movement echoing into the forest like an alarm. Halfway down, I made the mistake of looking up. Something leaned over the railing at the top. A figure, just a head and shoulders outlined against the black sky, watching me, perfectly still, perfectly silent, peering down like it had all the time in the world. I nearly lost my grip. My legs slipped, shins slamming into the ladder, but adrenaline forced me on, teeth clenched, eyes burning, every muscle straining to get to the ground. My boots finally hit dirt, and I almost collapsed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I sprinted straight into the trees, my flashlight beam jerking wildly, bouncing off trunks and branches that whipped my arms and tore at my clothes. I don't know how I kept my bearings. My GPS knocked against my thigh with every stride, the only lifeline I had. My lungs burned like fire. My chest heaved, but I didn't dare stop. I kept waiting to hear pursuit. Boots behind me, branches snapping, that creak of metal again, but there was nothing, nothing at all. And that was worse, because silence meant it was still there. Silence meant it didn't need to chase me. Silence meant it was letting me run. I stumbled, crashed into a fallen log, scrambled up again, legs numb, vision swimming with panic. I kept going until the trees began to thin and the faint pale strip of road appeared ahead, glowing like salvation. My car sat where I'd left it, shadowed and waiting. I didn't slow down. I slammed into the driver's side door, tore the keys from my pocket with shaking hands, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared, headlights flaring to life, cutting twin beams across the dirt track. I floored it, tires spitting gravel, the tower swallowed in darkness behind me. I drove faster than I should have, the road twisting, the forest a blur of shapes on either side. My hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't stop, not when the road straightened, not when the forest thinned, not until I was miles away and the trees were gone from the rearview mirror. And even then, I couldn't breathe. I can still hear it now, that slow, patient creak of the ladder in the dead of night, rung by rung, climbing toward me. And I know with every part of me that the fire lookout wasn't abandoned. Something was up there, and it wanted me to know. My name is Marcus, and in 2018 I set out alone to camp in the Wenatchee National Forest, deep in Washington state. I wanted quiet, isolation, nothing but the sound of wind in the trees and water against the shore. I parked at the end of an abandoned logging road and hiked 3 miles through dense, uneven terrain until I reached a lake marked on my topo map. It was small, hidden, perfectly still, framed by dark pines. The water was so flat it looked like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the sky and tree-line with unsettling precision, like a mirror no one had touched in years. I dropped my pack on the clearing near the shore and set up camp. The ground was soft with moss and pine needles, the kind of place where every footstep felt muffled. I pitched the tent so its opening faced the water, built a small fire ring from stones, and boiled water for a dehydrated meal. As dusk fell, I stretched out on my sleeping pad, arms folded behind my head, listening to frogs croaking somewhere across the water, their calls bouncing from one bank to another until it felt like I was surrounded. It was peaceful until I got up to relieve myself and noticed something in the dirt. Footprints. Barefoot. Human. Small, like a woman's or a teenager's. Pressed clear into the damp soil where the ground dipped near the lake. The toes splayed into the mud. The heels sank deep, the impression sharp and recent. They trailed from the water's edge straight into the trees. I crouched down, ran my hand across the edge of one, and felt cold dampness clinging to my skin. These weren't old. Someone had walked here recently. Someone barefoot, out here in the middle of nowhere. I stood, scanning the trees with a slow sweep. My skin prickled. The forest was thick enough that anything could be standing 20 feet away and I wouldn't see it. I clicked on my flashlight and made a wide circle around camp, the beam cutting into the trees, catching only bark and branches. Nothing moved, no sound but the frogs. But I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were on me, following my every step. I went back to the fire, stirred the embers, forced myself to eat. I tried to reason it away, maybe another hiker, maybe kids swimming earlier in the day. But this lake was too deep into the woods for that to make sense. When the fire burned low, I climbed into my tent. I left the rain fly off so I could see the stars, but I barely looked at them. My gaze kept drifting to the trees. That was the first moment I realized the wilderness can feel more alive than you want it to. I must have dozed, because the next time I opened my eyes, the woods had gone silent. The frogs were gone, the insects gone, the forest holding its breath. I sat up, pulse hammering in my ears, and listened to the kind of silence that feels wrong, like sound itself had been drained away. Then I saw them. Across the lake, at the far tree-line, two figures stood side by side, a man and a woman. They were silhouettes against the faint silver of the water, tall, unmoving. They didn't shift, didn't fidget, didn't even sway with the wind. Just standing there, watching me. I blinked, rubbed at my eyes, convinced I was seeing shadows. But they remained. Two pale, upright forms locked onto my camp like they'd been waiting for me to notice. I whispered hello. My voice cracked, weak, barely louder than the rustle of nylon. No answer, not a twitch, not even a tilt of the head. Just that same posture, side by side, eyes fixed. I grabbed my flashlight and snapped it on. The beam tore across the lake, lit up the opposite bank, and in that second they were gone. The light revealed nothing but bark and empty trees. My hand shook so violently the beam jittered over the branches. I swung it left, right, up the trunks. Nothing. No trace they had ever been there. I clicked the light off and sat frozen, heart slamming against my ribs. That was when the crunch came. Leaves shifting, brush snapping. Behind me, I spun in the tent, ears ringing, and the sound came again, closer this time. Heavy but deliberate, like someone placing each foot with intention. I unzipped the tent slowly, afraid of the sound, and slipped my light out first. The beam caught a glimpse, just legs, pale calves, bare feet, disappearing behind a tree trunk at the edge of the clearing. My throat closed up, my stomach dropped. Someone was here. Someone was walking barefoot through the woods in the middle of the night. I yanked the zipper the rest of the way, stumbled out of the tent with my pack in hand, and swept the light in a frantic arc. And there they were again, both of them. The man and the woman stood no more than 20 feet away, side by side, just like before, close enough now that I could see the blank smoothness of their faces in the half-light, pale skin that reflected the beam. Their arms hung limply at their sides, their bodies rigid, eyes locked on me. I shouted, "Who are you?" My voice cracked into the trees. They didn't flinch. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe. Just stood there, drinking me in. I took a step forward, flashlight clenched in my hand, and they mirrored me by stepping back into the trees, slipping into shadow so quickly I almost doubted they'd been there. Gone again. That was all I needed. I wasn't waiting for them to come closer. I ripped open my pack, grabbed my keys, stuffed what I could under my arm, and bolted straight into the brush. My tent, my fire, half my gear. I left it all behind without a second thought. The only thing that mattered was getting back to that road, back to my car, back to something man-made and safe. My flashlight beam whipped across the trees as I stumbled uphill, the light shaking so badly it carved wild arcs through the darkness. The forest felt endless, the slopes steeper than I remembered. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. Every branch clawed at my arms and face. But adrenaline shoved me forward. I didn't hear pursuit at first, just my own ragged breathing and the crunch of my boots. Then, faintly, off to my right, something moved. A shift of leaves. A soft, deliberate step. I swung the beam toward it, and for an instant I caught them. Two pale figures between the trees, side by side, watching me from no more than 30 feet away. I froze, light trembling across their torsos, and in the next blink they were gone. Not running, not ducking, just gone, as though the forest swallowed them whole. I turned and ran harder, pushing blindly through the undergrowth. Every few seconds I'd catch a flicker at the edge of vision, bare legs, slipping behind a trunk, pale arms vanishing into shadow, always just far enough away that I couldn't focus. They weren't chasing me the way a person would. They were keeping pace, sliding through the forest with no sound, no effort, appearing and disappearing like they'd been there long before I ever showed up. The silence was worse than footsteps, worse than voices. I wanted them to break a twig, to shout, to give me anything human to hold on to. But there was nothing, just the rasp of my breath and the whip of branches against nylon and skin. I tripped over a root, slammed shoulder first into the dirt, and for one awful second my flashlight rolled from my hand. Darkness collapsed around me. I scrambled after it on hands and knees, fingers clawing pine needles until I caught the cold cylinder, snapped it upright, and swept the beam ahead. They were there, 20 feet away, standing side by side again, still as stone, pale faces angled toward me. Their arms hung limp, bodies rigid, like mannequins someone had placed in the woods. I screamed, a raw, broken sound, and staggered to my feet. The light shook as I backed away, never taking it off them. And then, without a sound, they stepped backward, not toward me, away. One step, then another, melting into the trees until the beam caught nothing but bark. I didn't wait. I ran uphill until my thighs felt like they were tearing apart. Every muscle begged me to stop, but the image of those two figures standing and watching drove me on. My legs weren't mine anymore. They were machines fueled by fear, grinding me upward through mud and rock and shadow. At last, the trees began to thin. I saw it, the pale strip of the dirt road glinting under the moon, wide and open and empty. My car sat at the edge, half buried in shadow, a lifeline dangling in front of me. I almost cried when I saw it. I pushed harder, lungs wheezing, knees buckling, until I stumbled into the open, and practically collapsed against the driver's side door. My hands shook so violently I dropped the keys twice before. I could jab one into the lock. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut, chest heaving. For a moment all I could do was sit there, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, air rasping in and out, fingers trembling around the metal key. But something told me to look up, and I did. They were standing across the road, not in the trees now, not hiding, just there, side by side, directly facing me. The man and the woman, pale, barefoot, watching. They hadn't chased me. They hadn't needed to. They were already here, waiting at the road like they knew exactly where I'd come out. The sight of them broke something in me. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisted hard, and the engine roared. Headlights cut across the dirt, spilling over their bodies, but they didn't flinch. They didn't move. They just stood, eyes locked on mine through the glass. I slammed the gear shift into drive, tires spitting gravel as I floored it. The car shot forward, headlights burning into the forest. And in the mirror, the road narrowed and the figures vanished into shadow. I drove until the forest was miles behind me, until pavement replaced dirt, until my hands steadied enough to grip the wheel. Only then did I breathe. But the image of them hasn't left me. Two figures, side by side, barefoot, watching. That night stole camping from me forever. My name is Rachel, and for most of 2019, I lived out of a converted camper van. It wasn't glamorous, no solar panels or Instagram filters, just an old Dodge with wood paneling screwed into the walls and a mattress in the back. It rattled when the engine idled, leaked around the windows when it rained, and smelled faintly of gasoline, but it was mine. I'd been drifting through small towns and national forests, parking off back roads, chasing solitude. That October, I found myself in the Olympic Peninsula, Washington State, surrounded by one of the wettest, darkest forests in the country. I'd pulled off onto a narrow gravel track that cut 3 miles into the trees, the kind of road where branches slapped both sides of the van and moss climbed the trunks like fur. The farther I drove, the more the world shrank until all that existed was my headlights, the gravel under my tires, and the wall of black forest pressing in from every angle. When the track finally widened into a flat patch of dirt, I killed the engine. The silence that followed pressed heavy, the forest swallowing the sound. I stepped outside to stretch my legs. It was cold, damp, and smelled of cedar and wet earth. My boots sank slightly into the mud. All around me, the trees leaned in close, massive Douglas firs blotting out the last traces of the sky. No one was out here. No campfires, no distant hum of cars, no lights. Just me, alone, tucked miles away from the world. I slid the side door open and crawled into the back of the van, shoving aside a stack of blankets to reach my camping stove. I boiled noodles in a small pot, the flame hissing quietly while rain began to tick against the roof in soft, scattered drops. At first it was gentle, like fingertips tapping above me. But within an hour the storm arrived in full, hammering the van so hard it drowned out everything else. The sound was constant, overwhelming, as if I were submerged under a waterfall. I sat on my mattress with my knees pulled up, eating, staring out the cracked window. The forest was nothing but blackness. When the lightning flashed, the trees exploded into view for an instant, tall, endless, dripping with water, then vanished again, swallowed by dark. Every flash felt like a camera shutter catching something I shouldn't see. That's when I noticed it. A light. Not lightning. Not my reflection. A light moving outside, slow and deliberate, weaving between the trees. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, and leaned forward to press my face to the glass. The rain distorted it, streaks warping the glow, but it was real. A white-yellow orb, bobbing through the forest about 40 yards out, shifting left, then right, dipping low, then rising again. A lantern, or a flashlight. Someone was walking out there. My first thought was, it's a hiker, lost, maybe heading back to the road. But no one hikes this deep in a storm at night. And the way the light moved, it wasn't searching, it wasn't frantic, it was steady. The other lights swayed back and forth like pendulums. 2 more figures, waiting. Thunder cracked, the light vanished, and I was blind again. I staggered back from the window, pressing a hand against my mouth to stop the sound building in my throat. My pulse was violent, thundering in my ears louder than the rain. Another knock. Sharp, impatient. Ma'am. The voice had changed now. Firmer, less patient. We need you to open this door. My brain scrambled, clawing for options. Call someone. My phone was dead. I'd killed it earlier to save the battery. And now it sat useless in the glove compartment. Honk the horn. Drive? But the keys were in the front. And to get to them, I'd have to crawl right past the thin metal door he was standing outside of. And then, softly, I heard something else. Not a knock, not a voice. Footsteps, circling, slow, deliberate crunches in the mud, moving from one side of the van to the other. Someone was walking around me, dragging their hand along the metal as they went, fingernails scratching faintly against the paint. The sound was unbearable, a whispering screech that trailed along the length of the van until it stopped at the back doors. I turned, staring at the double doors inches from my mattress. My heart nearly stopped as I saw the handle twitch. Just a small movement, enough to know someone was testing it. I scrambled silently across the mattress, grabbed the broken umbrella pole I kept shoved under the bed, and clutched it like a weapon. My hands shook so badly the metal rattled in my grip. The knocking stopped. The voice didn't come again. Instead, silence. Silence except for the storm and the scrape of fingernails, dragging lazily across the back doors. Circling, circling, circling. They weren't leaving. They were waiting. The van had never felt so thin, so fragile. Every knock rattled through my bones. Every scrape of fingernails felt like they were already inside, peeling me open. I crouched on the mattress with that useless umbrella pole clutched in my fists, staring at the back doors, waiting for the handle to turn again. For a moment, nothing. Just rain and thunder and the storm pressing down from all sides. Then came a new sound, light, rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, 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 against the driver's side window. I turned, heart hammering. A shape loomed there, inches from the glass. A pale face blurred by streaks of rain, tilted in unnatural stillness. Eyes locked on mine through the curtain's thin edge. I snapped it shut, nearly tearing the fabric off the rod, biting down a scream so hard my jaw cracked. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then the knocking returned. Now on the passenger side, harder, faster, echoing through the thin walls. My ears rang with it, the storm swallowing everything until it felt like I was inside a drum. They were everywhere, moving around me in circles, knocking, scraping, tapping, testing every seam and panel, like hyenas pacing around a cage. I couldn't take it. My body moved on instinct. I dropped the umbrella pole, scrambled forward, and lunged over the driver's seat. My knees smacked the console, my shoulders slammed into the steering wheel. I groped for the keys in the glove box, hands slipping from rainwater dripping through the cracked seal above the dash. Another bang, this time at the back. Heavy, like a shoulder slamming into the doors. The van shuddered. I yanked the keys free, jammed one into the ignition, and twisted. The engine coughed, sputtered. My stomach dropped. Again, I twisted harder, praying, begging. The van roared to life with a guttural growl. Headlights blazed through the storm, cutting across the clearing, and in that flood of light I saw them. 3 figures, standing perfectly still in the rain. Not hiding now, not pretending. Just there, a few feet from the hood, pale and soaked and unmoving. The man who'd claimed to be sheriff in the middle, the 2 others flanking him like shadows. Their clothes clung to them, dripping, eyes wide and blank, watching me with a patience that was worse than rage. I froze. My hands clenched the wheel. The wipers screeched across the glass, clearing sheets of rain. But it didn't matter. They didn't move. They didn't even blink. Then the one in the middle took a single step forward. I screamed, slammed the gear shift into reverse, and floored it. The van jolted back over mud and roots, tires spitting, engine straining. The headlights swung wildly across the clearing, trees whipping past. I twisted the wheel, jammed it into drive, and stomped the pedal. The van fishtailed, gravel spraying, before it caught and shot down the narrow track. Branches clawed at the sides, rain lashed the windshield. The road a blur under the beams. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would split. But even as I tore down that track, I couldn't shake it. I felt them. Right behind me. Not running. Not chasing. Just there, like the storm itself carried them along. Every curve I hit, every dip, I imagined headlights blooming behind me. Every shadow in the mirror stretched too long. as if something pale and barefoot was keeping pace in the rain. The road felt endless, a tunnel of black trees whipping past, the storm pressing down so hard I could barely see beyond the beams. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, my teeth clamped so tight my jaw buzzed. I kept waiting for the van to stall, for the road to vanish, for them to appear right in front of me. And then, suddenly, the trees broke. Gravel gave way to pavement. Civilization. A highway slick with rain, empty and endless under the storm. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove, faster than I ever had, mile after mile, until my vision blurred and the van rattled so hard I thought it would tear apart. Only when the sky began to pale, hours later, did I finally pull off into a gas station lot, shaking so hard I couldn't even fit the nozzle into the tank. I've never gone back to that forest, never slept in the van again. I sold it within a week. And sometimes, when it rains, I swear I hear it again, tap, tap, tap against the glass, patient as ever.